You're listening to the Screaming Pods Network.
I think my favorite part of New Orleans was there were always two different real estate signs I would see. One said, not haunted, and one said, haunted. It's almost like a disclaimer, like you have to disclose before anybody looks at your property that wants to buy it, whether or not it's haunted. And how do you verify if it's true?
Right. I mean, voodoo, that's New Orleans.
But the thing is, voodoo's not the only thing that contributes to making this the most haunted city in America.
This episode is all about, that's right, NOLA, baby. We're talking all about Nolans.
So, on today's episode, we'll announce our winner of our survey contest, thanks to everybody who participated. But first, we have a super special guest storyteller on with us today, Todd C. Elliott.
Yeah, TC is a published author, radio host, and a former Louisiana Press Association award-winning journalist and photographer. His focus is mostly true crime, but he's beginning to branch out into fiction.
He's going to tell us about the horrifying inspiration behind his latest two novels, and we'll dive into some gruesome history of Louisiana. But first, we're going to dig right into the JFK assassination.
I started out in journalism, writing news for various newspapers across the state of Louisiana. I've always done radio. The way that I got my first book deal was actually by way of a feature story that I did when I was working in Eunice, Louisiana. And Eunice, Louisiana has some interesting history that ties into the JFK assassination. And in fact, New Orleans, there are more connections in New Orleans than there are in all of Dallas and all of Texas. And a lot of people don't realize that. But in Eunice, Louisiana, which is a small town in Cajun country, when I lived there, I did a story on a woman by the name of Rose Cherami. And Rose Cherami is forever immortalized in Oliver Stone's 1991 Academy Award-winning film JFK, which they show in the first dramatized sequence of that film. They show a woman being thrown from a moving vehicle. And that was Rose Cherami. And she told the state troopers and hospital staff that saw her that day. Now, this was on November 20th, 1963. So it was some 48 hours before President Kennedy was murdered in Dallas. And she told people on that day that the men who threw her out of the moving vehicle were on their way to Dallas to kill the president on Friday. It was a pretty specific time and place where the leader of the free world would be assassinated. So I thought this was a fascinating story. I started writing features in local magazines, in Lake Charles, Louisiana, my hometown. And then in Eunice, I did a feature story that caught the attention of a publisher because it was on the eve of the 50th anniversary of the JFK assassination. And so this publisher reached out to me and said, hey, do you have enough for a book? And it's a very small book, so you can see I barely had enough for a book, but I did. It's a small book, my first book, but it's a huge story. And I've always been fascinated with the Kennedy assassination ever since I was a kid, and just really into a lot of Louisiana history and legends that's really like unearthed that most people never heard of, because I think history is fascinating, and it's still very much alive, especially like in the French Quarter where I work. You have to understand the French Quarter is a very strange place. New Orleans, of course, being a strange place, but New Orleans is a very old city. In fact, we are celebrating this year 300 years of the city of New Orleans. So the city was founded in 1718, and when it was founded in 1718, the French Quarter was the entirety of the city at one time, and the French only knew how to build medieval-style cities back then, so the French actually built the French Quarter in a medieval fashion, and the French Quarter was actually completely surrounded by great walls and ramparts. And I believe that those old walls that are no longer standing to this day, I think they contribute to the French Quarter being one of the most haunted spots in the most haunted city in North America. Because I believe, much like cemetery walls, any spirits that are in a state of unrest in the French Quarter, I believe that they still adhere to or follow those now invisible barriers of the French Quarter. So nothing really leaves, and all that has been contained over the years is still, within the French Quarter, within the confines of the French Quarter to this day. They have blank lots or empty lots within the French Quarter where buildings have fallen, and sometimes buildings just fall in the French Quarter. That happens from time to time. And what they're still finding to this day, the University of New Orleans, the anthropological department of the University of New Orleans is actually undergoing archaeological digs and excavations in the oldest part of a major city. And what they're finding in these old courtyards or empty lots now in the French Quarter, they are finding they're finding skeletal remains and bones. They're finding the original domiciles of the indigenous people that actually once lived in the French Quarter. I'm talking about the Bayou Gula Indians. Now, the Bayou Gula Indians were a very strange band of Indians in this part of the world. They lived in the area that we call the French Quarter nowadays. And they lived there because they knew it was the highest point in the land and the best place to live right around there. Because, I don't know if you know this, but the French Quarter is the highest point in the entirety of the city of New Orleans. Everything outside of the French Quarter is a sloping bowl that goes down to about 9 feet below sea level. But in the French Quarter, it's about 6 or 7 feet above sea level. And the Indians knew this. Now, when the first white explorers encountered these Bayou Gula Indians, they noticed that they had something never before seen in any Native American, North American tribe. These Bayou Gula Indians actually had walls built up around their Indian village. And these walls were made from cane poles that they had stuck in the ground. The strange thing about the walls were they were in a spiral pattern or in a spiral formation. So the walls of the Bayou Gula Indian village would spiral and spiral, and at the center of the spiral lay the Indian village of the Bayou Gula. And many people believed that they were trying to keep out, malevolent forces or evil spirits buried in the ground in the French Quarter. But more than likely, historically speaking, what they were probably trying to keep out were the bands of cannibalistic Indian tribes that we definitely had in southeast and southwest Louisiana at that time. It was not uncommon in the early 1700s or late 1600s to encounter the people eaters in Louisiana. So that's probably what they were really trying to keep out. But that also means that if they're uncovering graves and original domiciles of these Bayou Gula Indians, then that means that they're possibly Indian burial mounds in the French Quarter. And, you lump that in with voodoo and ghosts and serial killers and axe murderers and things like that, and then you throw in, Indian burial mounds, and it's like we're definitely cooking with gas in the most haunted city in North America. A lot of people say the reason these buildings fall in the French Quarter is because of the Indian spirits, that these heathen souls may be in a state of unrest to this very day. There's a certain darkness in the French Quarter, that you'll see beautiful things and then you'll see, horrible things in the French Quarter as well,
We met Todd C. Elliott in New Orleans. He was giving us a tour around the city and telling us all about murderous women who had either once lived there or actually committed a murder inside the French Quarter.
The one that I enjoy the most is the one that's the most popular. It resonates with a lot of folks now, and it's a part of Louisiana and New Orleans history that really became kind of trendy or popular due to the American Horror Story series. American Horror Story Season 3, Coven, touches on the Madame Marie Delphine Lalaurie, a historical figure, a real woman that was portrayed in American Horror Story Season 3, Coven. She was actually portrayed by Kathy Bates. Now, there must have been something seriously wrong with this woman. Nobody knows exactly what, but she was responsible for the torture and murder of many of her slaves in the household. The Lalaurie Mansion is considered the most haunted spot in the entirety of the French Quarter. It's what we call the Haunted Mansion. And look, if the French Quarter is, if it's Disneyland or Disney World for adults, and let's be real, it is, and if that's so, then the Lalaurie Mansion is definitely the Haunted Mansion. And I've experienced just some strange things there, like my electronics will act up usually around that place, and then it also ties into a very famous Hollywood actor, Nicolas Cage, who many years later came to own the Lalaurie Mansion. And many people think that there was a curse put in place upon Nicolas Cage after he lived for a short time in the French Quarter.
Then TC shares that New Orleans isn't the only city in Louisiana that has a tragic history.
One of the murders actually occurred in my hometown, and I had never known this until the late 90s when a friend of mine, we were both fans of American, just like true crime and real American horror stories, you know. He let me borrow this book. It was an encyclopedia, and I referenced it in my book. It was A to Z, like the encyclopedia of satanic murders or ritual murders in the United States. And I was fascinated by this. And I started with the first chapter, so it starts with A, and A for Axe brought up Axeman in this book. And I read it, and I was like, whoa, they mentioned my hometown, you know, and I had no idea any of this. Because when I first started doing the research, the murders were less than 100 years old. The highlights of the murders, really, the peak of these murders, really started in 1911 into 1912. So now they're well over 100 years old. But at the time, I was just totally transfixed and absorbed with the story. And I only found very little information in this book. And the only clue that the killer or killers actually left behind at a murder scene was in Lake Charles. And, you know, it was a very cryptic message and a biblical quote at that. And it was signed by, this biblical quote was signed by someone or something called the Human Five. And this just sort of terrified me and fascinated me at the same time. So I wanted to learn more, and I just took myself down to the library. Remember those? And I started doing research and just finding old newspaper articles going back to 1911 and 1912. And it turns out, and my theory is this, that the Axeman murders that happened here in the South are the largest unsolved serial killing in U.S. history. There were some people who were arrested. In fact, a woman was accused of being the Axeman. And I thought that was fascinating as well. So there's kind of a theme going on. This Clementine Barnabette woman shows up, and she was accused of being the Axeman. So they had arrested her in Lafayette, Louisiana, and put her in prison. They said she was part of a hoodoo or voodoo cult, and there was a cult that was tied to a church in New Orleans that was called the Church of the Sacrifice, and that they practiced human sacrifice and all this crazy ritual murder and belief, and was tied to this woman. And she was arrested, and they thought after they arrested this Clementine Barnabette that the murders would stop, and they didn't. After Clementine was arrested, the murders continued into Lake Charles and then into Texas. So it definitely wasn't Clementine. Some people say that if she was part of a gang or a cult, that the cult continued the killings to exonerate her and free her, which she was never truly exonerated. But it is just a wild ride through murder and mayhem, and it gets into voodoo and the power of belief, really. And one friend of mine who's a college professor noted that my first book, which was about Rose Cherami, and the second book, Axes of Evil, which touches on Clementine Barnabette, that these are both sort of, there's kind of a theme going on in my books that I'm fascinated by this research or this history that has to do with women from the underground. That there's definitely some sort of femme fatale involved in my works. And he actually referred to me, he called me Hades one night in a bar. He said, You're the Greek god Hades, because you have these Persephone figures, these women who are from the underworld, they're tied to the underworld, and it's, very tragic. And I was like, oh, okay, well, I've never been called a Greek god before, but I'll take Hades. That's good.
TC also shared with us the terrifying inspiration behind his first work of fiction, the 789s.
The 789s, that's my first published fiction. And interestingly enough, Nightmare actually inspired that one. Go figure, right? What was fascinating about the concept of this book was I had a terrifying nightmare, and it was so vivid, and I actually had the characters introduced to me in the dream. A lot of the story actually was introduced to me in the dream, and it was such just a waking dream, I guess you could say, a nightmare, that it's one of those dreams where you wake up and you grab a piece of paper and a pen, and you just start scribbling like as much as you can remember as the dream starts to wear off, and that's what I did. I woke up and the early morning, just absolutely terrified by this nightmare. Couldn't believe the dream I had, so I started writing it all down, probably on the manuscript of Axes of Evil. Probably, I'll tell you that. And just from what I remembered, I wrote everything down. And I set that piece of paper away with a stack, just a shuffle of papers and junk that I, kind of keep around. And I did nothing with it for about a year. And then when my daughter came to live with me, she was 14, and my daughter felt so compelled to come to me and say, Dad, I had this terrible nightmare. And she told me about a nightmare that she had. And she actually had a character's name and everything. I knew then that it was a sign for me to find that old piece of paper and start writing the 789. So the 789 is actually a melding of two different nightmares, if you will. And so I actually did find that piece of paper where I scribbled down notes. Couldn't believe I still had it. And the book came to me, and I probably finished writing it in about 6 or 8 weeks, something like that. But it was just fascinating because my daughter had the character revealed to her, and the name and everything. And it touches on a lot of what I think young people might find, nightmarish, and the fact that the main sort of villain, if you will, is a woman, but she's an elderly woman. And when you're young, it's terrifying to think that one day you'll be old, So I think young readers will find that absolutely horrific. But really, it is, the 789s was this, what it is in the story, as the dream sort of revealed to me, there was a religious sect. Now, none of this is verified. I'm just saying that in my dream and in the story, 789s, the 789s were the OSS. And after the OSS was dissolved, this is now a religious sect within the CIA. And they are a group of villains, that are responsible for every single conspiracy theory that you've ever heard.
Now, I love conspiracy theories, but I love a good ghost story even more. So I was really excited when we had the chance to talk to TC about his soon-to-be released novel, The Lowerline.
A lot of the readership, the demographic for readers now, mostly women, and I think women will respond to the Lowerline because it's a modern Gothic sort of not romance, but it's a love story. It's also a ghost story. The vampire love stories have sort of been played out thanks to Twilight and things like that. So I just wanted to offer something a little different in a ghost story. And New Orleans is definitely a perfect setting for a ghost story. I've talked to a lot of people, and a lot of people always kind of say the same thing. Ghosts, usually, they'll appear in their bedrooms, usually like when they're sleeping. If someone's in bed, oh, I saw a ghost. And it's usually what they call a hypnagogic state that's the sort of between dreaming and being awake. They call it hypnagogia, right? So I believe that you have sort of a privilege. If you're in that state, you kind of see sort of between the worlds, and maybe spirits and things like that may then manifest to you. But I got to say, one morning I was in a hotel room. I stayed the night in a hotel off of the highway in Eunice, Louisiana. I just remember when I was going to sleep that night, strange thing, as I was starting to doze off, I got the impression, or I thought I saw someone like looming over me while I was laying down sleeping, okay? And that's creepy right there, but I don't think I did anything about it. I think I just fell asleep. But that morning, as dawn was beginning to rise out there was definitely a presence in my room that I was made aware of. And the only way I was made aware of it was because I woke myself up. I woke myself up by my own words. I was talking in my sleep, and I was actually repeating the words, "You're not real. You're not real." And as I became cognizant and aware that I was saying these words, the thing that was in my room was very pissed off that I was saying that it was not real. There was a woman that appeared to be sort of twisted, disfigured. It looked like black fluid, like oily substance covering it, right? And this thing was so angry, it sort of hissed at me or whatever, and then totally disappeared. And I was convinced that I had just seen my first ghost. And I talked to the owners of that hotel, and I asked them, I said, "Hey, it's kind of a weird question, but did anybody ever die in that room there, you know?" And they were like, somebody died in the parking lot a few years ago, something like that. And I said, okay, because I don't want you to think I'm weird, but I think I saw a ghost last night in my room. And they were like, really? I said, yeah, it was this kind of disfigured woman, a kind of bent and broken, covered in black oil. And the owner of the hotel, when I was telling him this, kind of describing the specter that I'd seen, he kind of like went, oh. And I was like, what do you mean, oh? And he said, well, the woman that used to own this hotel actually died in a terrible car crash just right down the road, and she was actually quite disfigured, covered in motor oil, things like that, when they found her body. And I was like, oh, my God, wow. So that sort of inspired me to write the Lowerline, and it's kind of just takes you a little trip through New Orleans and one radio man's experience with the paranormal in the most haunted city in North America. So it should be a good read. I look forward to putting it out soon.
We're so excited. I'm like on the edge of my seat. I cannot wait to dive into the Lowerline.
Yeah, man, you gave me goosebumps. Like, that was terrifying. Have you ever gone back to that place?
Yeah, I in fact, I always stay in that room. That's my room now.
Nice.
I do. Room 17. And it's called, if you ever get a chance, you want to go, hey, it's a haunted place. It's called La Cardienne. It's a play on words like Acadian or Acadienne, but they La Acadienne in Eunice, Louisiana. It's a very old sort of motor inn or hotel. Yeah. They would love the fact that I get like a plug for them saying that it's a haunted. Room 17 is haunted, so.
Yeah.
No, that's fantastic. We just might make our way down there.
Oh, you should, for Mardi Gras. Try that Cajun Mardi Gras. It's totally different from New Orleans Mardi Gras.
Is that different in a good way?
Oh, yeah, it's like it's more of a rural Mardi Gras, and it dates back to France, really, the old school Mardi Gras. Yeah. And they chase chickens, so it's a lot of fun.
Make sure to check out Todd C. Elliott's new book, The Lowerline, available on Amazon, and check out his other works. We'll have links to purchase on our website, as well as links to each book's Facebook page. Go like them now to stay up to date. And if you're taking a trip to New Orleans, make sure to book your tour with TC by contacting New Orleans Legendary Walking Tours. We'll also post their information on our site as well.
Seriously, that tour was great.
It was amazing.
And thank you so much, TC. We really enjoyed having you on.
Yes, please. You're welcome back anytime. If you've experienced a haunting in New Orleans, or if you've had a run-in with the voodoo priestess, or almost fell into a swamp with gators, tell us all about it. Submit your story on our website, atthefire.com.
And if you enjoyed the episode, tell your friends. You can rate and review us pretty much anywhere. We'd really appreciate it.
And this is the part of the episode where we announce our grand winner of the listener survey.
Did we give away $50?
We gave away a $50 gift card.
$50 in Amazon money.
In Amazon money. Plus, they get some pretty sweet, spooky swag.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about all that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's some cool shit.
Yeah, so congratulations to Sean Drager. Thanks for participating, and shoot us an email at admin@atthefire.com, and we'll get you all hooked up.
Thanks again for being with us tonight. My name is Ben.
And I'm Jill, and make sure to lock your door tonight so the X-Man doesn't come get you.
We'll see you next time at the fire.
Special thanks to Todd C. Elliott for joining us tonight at the fire. And this episode's music was made possible by Raphael Archangel, Kevin MacLeod, The Insider, Hella Kalin, Rod Hamilton, 3 Chain Links, Raspberry Tickle, and you can find them on freemusicarchive.org and freesound.org.
You're listening to the Screaming Pods Network.